All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Callie, and I'm with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, we are all about bringing science and adventure into classrooms all across the world. Today, we are joined by groups in Florida. We have groups from across Ontario, the East Coast, as well as Connecticut, I think, and so many of you joining us from YouTube today. So it's going to be a really awesome group. You can feel free to say hi in the chat if you'd like. Today, we have a very exciting presentation in store because we are joined by Lianna Nixon, who is a climate change storyteller and a professional photographer and videographer as well. She's going to blow your mind with her presentation for the next 20-25 minutes or so. And then after that, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions that you guys might have. So it's going to be a really fun day, and I'm really excited to introduce you to Lianna. So without further ado, here she is.
Thank you so much, Callista, for the great introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Lianna Nixon, and I'm just going to share with you my quick presentation. Can you guys see it full screen? Okay. I'm just going to assume that's a yes. But today I'm here to talk to you all about the power of storytelling for the sake of Arctic science communication. So as Callista said, I am a storyteller and an educator at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I spent about 6 months on the ice with the MOSAiC Expedition, which was a year-long epic expedition where scientists observed the Arctic climate for an annual cycle, so for its entire year. And just to give you a little bit of what it looked like, the distances that we drifted across the Arctic Ocean. We started in Norway, so that would be generally the right corner, and sailed all the way up to our first red mark, which is where we found a piece of ice that the ship could actually drift with, and where the scientists could set up their equipment. And then we sailed down south across the Arctic Ocean, very close to the North Pole there. And at that blue section, that is where I got on board and saw our main ice floe actually crumble into a bunch of tiny little pieces on the 31st of July. Then we sailed all the way back up north again to find another ice floe to really observe the rest of the annual cycle. So while we were up there for MOSAiC, we got to see a lot of different things that were happening throughout the year. So during this red and yellow and part of the green sections there, the scientists were in complete darkness, so polar day. Whereas when I was there for the blue and the purple portions, I was there during polar day, which is the summertime in the Arctic. So this is when the sun is up at the surface and it does not set for months. This photo is actually taken at 3 in the morning. So we had to be really good with having little blinders or making sure that we could get good sleep at night. And the daylight provided a lot of different and unique opportunities for scientists to study. This is when melt season happens. And melt is when the sunlight travels to the ice surface, the ice melts from above and below, and the ice also fuels photosynthesis for algae. That is the foundation of this really complex ecosystem, from plankton, which are tiny little shrimp-like creatures, to birds, seals, whales, and of course, polar bears. And as somebody who really enjoys wildlife and charismatic megafauna, it was really exciting to see these polar bears. And out of the 60 encounters that we had on MOSAiC, 40 of them were during the times that I was there. So we saw lots of polar bears, including little cubs, which were quite cute. But to be a storyteller on MOSAiC, it was my job to capture with film and photography what the story is really about. And at the surface, it's a scientific and logistical feat. But there was a lot of complex sub-stories that made this expedition so unique, that made it so important for us to share with the world. So I'm going to go through a couple of those with you all, just some themes that I thought were very important that made up the MOSAiC story and why it's so important for us to know about it. The first is that MOSAiC was contextualized in this pandemic. So when going to Germany for my quarantine, I wasn't quite sure whether or not the MOSAiC expedition was going to continue, but thankfully for the logistics team, we were able to quarantine and travel up to the north, back north, to actually get on the Polarstern. And this was something that was very unique happening, whereas other expeditions had to be postponed due to the pandemic. And it was just wonderful to see the international collaboration and special help from other research vessels like the Maria S. Marian, the Zana, and the Russian research vessel Tryashkinov, who all helped bring scientists to and from the Polarstern during the expedition. Another really important part of capturing the Arctic story is the Arctic itself. Every single day, the Arctic lent different changes and different small details. And so even though we were looking at this big picture and seeing that the Arctic is not just a plain, flat, white landscape, it actually is full of color, it's full of textures, it has ridges, so these ice blocks that kind of built up on each other, and melt ponds in the spring and summer. And it made you want to focus on the small little details that happened on the ice too. So these are frost feathers, which are really beautiful, delicate pieces of ice that can grow to about like an inch or so. And this really happens when these delicate little balances in the atmosphere, ice, ocean, climate system are really working together. The story also encompasses what it means to be a scientist and what is the identity of a scientist. I don't think that many of us imagine scientists using chainsaws, knowing how to drive snowmobiles in order to actually conduct their science. These skills and physical labor is really an important part of polar expeditions and polar science. You need to make sure that you have the right tools and know how to use them safely to ensure that we can have research equipment put onto the ice and so that we're safe. And anything that we took on the ice, we also had to take off. So we did have the ship cranes and also a helicopter, but sometimes it wasn't flying conditions. So we would have to use our manpower in order to get it large pieces of equipment onto the ice. So this really just is to emphasize the coordination that it took and teamwork amongst everybody to ensure that we could set up our research sites. Another important part about being in the Arctic and doing this research is not being afraid to get wet or cold. The Arctic is an extreme environment. Between this thousands of meter ocean and us was just this little thin layer of ice. And you were going to get wet. You were going to get cold from the harsh snowstorms, blizzards, and winds. And so long as you were safe and happy, that is what you kind of dealt with. This here is Felix. He's an ice scientist, and he's currently walking through a melt pond in this photo. And sometimes our wetsuits, or survival suits for that matter, get leaks in them. So then they fill up with water, which is not the most comfortable thing in the world, but that's just part of the research. And this really brought up the idea for me about resilience, about what it means to go through and overcome these obstacles. At times, we were hundreds of miles away from civilization. So anything or any support that we needed had to be on each other. This meant that everything that we had to do meant that we needed to be safe, that we needed to be thoughtful about ourselves, about others, about what can actually be done during those times. The Polarstern was also our home on board. So the MOSAiC story also includes what was life like on board the ship. Things like self-care, like getting a haircut or, working out. We had a sauna on board, which was quite nice. Were little important self-care things that we needed to do to ground ourselves, to ensure that we would still be efficient in our science and also be taking care of our own selves and our community. So this here's Jonathan. He actually had a big beard before this photo, and he's getting a really massive transition and a haircut from an eco-scientist, JP here. The MOSAiC story is also about expressing joy. And the scientists and experts that were on MOSAiC were so joyful about being on the ice. They're so passionate about the Arctic. And so they expressed their joy in different ways. We have sometimes had ice nights where we were allowed to go out and just play outside in our logistics area and stretch our legs and get off the ship. And here is ice team scientist Igor. He made his own paddle board by having a pontoon and a scrap wood, and he's just paddling on this melt pond here. Curiosity was also an incredibly important part of the MOSAiC expedition. Sometimes we think that scientists have all of the answers, but that's not the case. Scientists came up there eager to ask questions and hopefully receive answers through the research that they were doing. And sometimes their answers didn't come, but that didn't necessarily halt them from what they were doing in their work. In fact, it helped them expand what they were doing and ask more questions about the world around them and how it works. Science is also not just here inside your head and your brain. It's also about being fully embodied. This is a eco team scientist. She's a sea ice microbiologist, Ali Fong, and she was one of the people that taught me that science is very much part of the body. You need all your senses in order to understand what's happening. So you could see her actually look at a piece of ice here and there to see if it's actually made up of salty water or fresh water. Here in this photo, she's holding an ice core. So that's a cylinder of ice that we drill from the surface to the bottom of it in order to understand how it's formed. And she's listening to the salt water escape from these brine channels that were formed in the ice. So salt has created all these holes, and now that water is leaving it. And it sounded like Rice Krispies or Pop Rocks. And these kinds of observations that you could do just from seeing, hearing, touching, smelling were really important in understanding what was actually happening out in the field. The MOSAiC expedition also wouldn't have been complete without the teamwork. In fact, we probably wouldn't have been able to successfully do everything without the volunteering and helping of others. So this here is Michael Lombardi. He is one of the scientists for this Tropos balloon that they call the Beluga. And he can't carry it himself all the way from the ship to Balloon Town because it's massive and he would probably float away. So here's a team of atmospheric scientists who volunteered their own time to actually help Michael kind of lead the balloon back from the Polarstern to their research site. And the MOSAiC expedition also had not scientists as well. They had very important people that played very important roles. Crew members who were on board were really important in ensuring that the Polarstern was at the standards that we needed, assisted in science equipment on board the ship, but we also had polar bear guards. And they were monumental in helping us make sure that we were being safe out there, making sure that there weren't any surprise polar bears that were just around the corner or behind a ridge, because we wanted to be safe and we also wanted the polar bears to be safe. So why does MOSAiC matter? Well, the scientists are bringing back home the world's largest raw data set, which maybe to all of you right now doesn't necessarily matter, but this raw data set actually tells us about the Arctic's past, present, and its future. And we'll be using this information for generations and generations in order to really understand the future of the Arctic. The Arctic has changed. For scientists who were on board, who have been studying and researching the Arctic for decades, they were sometimes shocked at what the ice was doing in the summer, the melt, how dynamic the ice really is. And so this research is going to help us understand what is the future of the Arctic, and hopefully, how does that affect our global climate system? Now for us, as youth especially, we are heirs to an entire living planet. And the stories that we tell, the stories that we share, help us connect, educate, and inspire change. And the MOSAiC story is just one piece of this greater Arctic story. It's going to help us with our future and understanding how we can be part of the Arctic, even when we live thousands of miles away. That is all I have for you today on storytelling, and I would love to hear your questions.
Well, thank you so much for that really awesome presentation. I know, like, me personally, I'm really fascinated by your career and everything that you've done, so that was really interesting. So now we're gonna jump into questions from our live classes. So first, we're gonna hear from Mr. LaVogue.
Oh, thanks for taking us. I'm with about 134th and 5th graders, Lianna, and the questions coming in on my iPad are they love your photos. They want to know how. I'm going to combine a few questions. 3 different girls basically asked, how do you get your job as an Arctic storyteller? Like, how does one apply to be an Arctic storyteller?
How does one apply? So I have been storytelling, at least for wildlife photography, for about 7 years now. So I've been working in conservation work. And this just kind of led me to really working in the Arctic. I started working in the Arctic about 4 years ago. And how I did it was just persistence, trying to blend things together. Like, I also work in education, so I help create activities that you guys do in your science classes and stuff. And so combining storytelling and science really helped me actually get on this expedition. But any advice for you future photographers, filmmakers, storytellers, artists who want to be in really cool places like the Arctic, just continue following the passion, continue being really stubborn about what you want to do, like persevere. So that's my answer, I guess.
Yeah, that was a really awesome question and a great answer too, so thank you. Next, we're going to go to Nova Scotia. And you might need to unmute your mic if you're going to ask a live question there.
Okay.
No.
No? So I guess we don't have any live questions at this moment.
Oh, yeah, no problem. We can always come back to you later if you have any questions, so that's not a problem.
Sure. Is this an ongoing expedition, or is this expedition all finished now?
So this expedition has been completed. It stopped as of October 12th of 2020. Sorry, I keep forgetting where we are. It's 2021. Can't believe it. But there are supporting missions, though, that are still contributing to this greater MOSAiC expedition. There's stuff that's actually happening in some of the polar regions on land called T-MOSAiC, so it's terrestrial mosaic. There's also scientists right now who are currently working on follow-up proposals based on this work.
Okay.
All right, next let's hear from Mr. Silva's grade 6 class. And you might need to unmute as well.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I've got a student here named Michael who would like to ask a question.
Okay, yeah. So when you were driving it, if you guys stopped and it was like way below sub-zero, wouldn't the ice quickly freeze around your boat? How would you get it to start? Keep going?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Michael. So when we actually were driving the ship, or the very professional crew, because I could never drive a ship, they had some really great strategies in order to break up the ice around them. So sometimes they would just move back and forth, like a lot, but also they would start their motors of the ship. So sometimes the ship wasn't even turned off. And this was to ensure that we stayed on the ice, because like at some points we were just anchored on there. So that would help clear away a lot of that ice that would come and surround us.
And now we're going to hear from Miss S's class. If you have any questions. I think you just need to turn on your mic there, actually.
There you go. Sorry about that. Yeah, one was, we had quite a few questions about the idea of the photography that you were taking. Was how would you take pictures of these polar bears? They look like they're so close. Fifth grade class. So.
Yeah, so that's a
We
great.
also had questions. The second question, sorry, is how did you sleep? Where did you sleep and eat and so forth?
Okay, great. So to answer the first one, I have a lens that's this big. It's a 600 millimeter lens, and it's greatly magnifies subjects that are really far away. So sometimes we had polar bears come up to the vessel when everybody was on board, of course, just because they were curious. But most of the time, the polar bears were far away. So I would take out my big giant lens and walk, because you can't run on vessels. It's apparently dangerous. Just walk around with my giant lens to, set it up and take photos. And often with polar bears, when you photograph them, they're kind of slow, curious beings, so you could take your time to really set things up to make it all nice and pretty. So that's question one. And for at least polar bears. And then for scientists, I would be in their face. Well, not like super in their face, but I had a wide angle lens that I would use that really helped me kind of investigate what they were doing as they were doing their work. For the second question, so everything that we did on board, eating and sleeping, was all on the ship. We had cabins, so where we would sleep, and we would have windows, and so we would put down blinders for when it was really bright out at times. And then we had 2 cafeterias on board the vessel, and this is where we would eat about 3 meals a day. We also had 3 o'clock cake time, which was quite nice. And yeah, everything was on the ship.
Awesome. Now we have a few questions from YouTube. So the first one kind of piggybacks off that other animal question. So have you ever come across an injured animal? Do you ever interact with the animals? How does that work?
That's a great question. On MOSAiC, there was, we did not have an injured animal on, while we were on MOSAiC. In my past, in other places like Alaska and other countries in Africa, we have come across injured animals, but as a wildlife storyteller, photographer, filmmaker, you kind of have to let nature run its course, especially if it's nature related. If it's human intervention on a place that is managed by people, then that is up to the like rangers that are there, or people that are actually managing the lands and the animals, on what to do about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question that we have here is, what is the most surprising thing that you've seen related to climate change?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, in general or in the Arctic? That's just going to be my follow-up question there. Because in the Arctic, I guess, for me, it was how thin the first year ice is, and how quickly we were able to actually get up to the North Pole. Now, the sea ice moves constantly, so it wasn't, and it's been done before, going very quickly from Greenland to the North Pole. However, a lot of the ice that we saw at the North Pole, which I would think has the most concentrated multi-year ice, was actually all first year or second year. So it was still quite young, and it was rotten. So.
Wow. All right, let's go back to Mr. LeVogue's class if you have any more questions.
Oh, we got plenty. Well, we live in South Florida, so it's sunny and warm all the time, and we go fishing all the time. So you've answered some of the food questions, but did anybody ever fish for food? And since it's always warm here, I've got a lot of questions regarding like what was the temperature?
Okay.
And then did you fish? Did anybody go fishing?
Awesome. Those are great questions. Yes, somebody did do fishing for science, first of all. Due to some of the restrictions for international waters and fishing, we were only really allowed permits for science. So we did have somebody that had a 600-foot long rope or line that they let down at the bottom to catch fish and bring it up. And they were trying to see what kind of species were actually in the Central Arctic, which was very cool. And for the follow-up question, we didn't get to eat them, to make that point clear, just because it's science. And the follow-up question to how cold it was, during the summer, so the peak of melt season, it was around 0 degrees Celsius, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So just around like freezing point. And sometimes it would go above or below. And this would allow for this melt to happen. When it got towards polar night, it actually got as cold as negative 40 degrees Celsius, which I think is around negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So there was a lot of layers involved in what you wore every single day, whether it was polar night or polar day.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to go back to Mr. Silva's live class and see if anyone has a question there.
Yeah, we have Dalton who has a question. Hopefully we don't lose connection. Go ahead, Dalton.
How can you guys analyze the data to predict what will happen for like the different ways to help the ecosystem?
Dalton, that is such a great question. Thank you for asking that. So the scientists use these things called, and essentially what they've done is that they take this data that is put into a computer and numerically corrected, and then they're able to actually put this in simulations within these global climate models. That is just my surface knowledge of it, just because I am not a scientist personally, and I don't want to say anything super incorrect. But they use these models that they've been producing for decades that project the future. Not all of them are completely perfect. That's why MOSAiC was there, to fill in the gaps of a lot of this knowledge that we don't have. And there's numerous ones that help us understand generally what this trajectory is going to look like in the future for the Arctic.
Yeah, that was a really awesome question. So thanks for asking that one. We're going to go back to PAHS school.
Oh my God, hi. Okay. Okay, I have 2 questions. The first one is how long the expedition lasted, like how long were you in the Arctic for? And also the raw data that was collected during the expedition, is it published or do they have to wait to analyze it?
Great questions. So the first one is that the expedition lasted for an entire year. So September 20th of 2019 to 2020 was when the Polarstern was in the Arctic. I was there from May to October. So it was a long time, but time really goes by quickly there when you have so much to do. And for the second, for this raw data, it's accessible to everyone. So you can actually go see it on databases. I think they're still just trying to organize information because we have too much, in the words of some scientists. We have a lot. But yes, it's accessible to everybody. And that's a really unique thing about MOSAiC, is that they want to make sure that everybody has access to this information.
Awesome. Okay, so now back to Mrs. S class. And just your microphone again, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Another basic question about lifestyle, I guess, on the ice again. How long were you outside in this cold weather? Was that difficult to do? Did you ever go out at night during that super cold, my goodness, negative 40-degree weather? How do you prepare for that kind of weather?
That's a great question. So we were on the ice about 8 hours a day, so a proper working day. We had 3 different sessions when we could go outside. First was 9 to 11:30, 1:30 to 3:30, and then 3:30 to 5:30. These sessions allowed for polar bear guards to switch out because looking at the ice for, 3-4 hours is a really long and can be really hard on your eyes. So we were out there for like about 8 hours a day. You could extend it in a little bit later. It just depended on if the conditions were safe and if we had resources to ensure that people could watch for polar bears. We did have a couple intensive observational period sessions where we did do 36 hours straight of studying, but that was just done in rotations again and a lot of coordinating of polar bear guards and crew.
So a question that we are getting on YouTube is, we know you've had such a really dynamic career up in the Arctic, but what sort of adventures are you hoping to do next?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, just wanting to play my part in being, a good person in the pandemic, not trying to go out in a lot of places. But I do want to return to the Arctic again. There's this saying about being bit by the Arctic bug, and a lot of us people that are interested in the polar realms get bit by that Arctic bug and are trying to figure out ways to return. I also do work in Alaska with brown bears, like the big grizzly bears, so I'm hoping to return there soon as well.
Amazing. That sounds so exciting. Let's go back to Mr. LeVoque. He has some great questions.
Yeah, I'm going to combine 2 4th grade questions. They're actually opposite questions. So Finn wants to know what your favorite part of the expedition was, and Lucy wants to know what your hardest part of the expedition was.
Oh, those are great questions, Finn and Lucy. So my favorite part of the expedition, that's really hard. I think the community that was out there was probably my favorite aspect of the expedition. Everybody was passionate and joyful to be out there, to share the Arctic story together, to do work together. And that was my favorite part, was just being out there with such a wonderful group of people that were from about 30 different countries. Seeing that question in the chat there, just to combine that answer. The hardest part would probably be that we had very limited resources to talk to people at home. We had WhatsApp, which is like a texting app, and as well as satellite phones, which often kind of buzzed out. They weren't always the most reliable resource. So yeah, not being able to talk to my family as much and seeing how they're doing was pretty hard.
Amazing. Okay, now back to Mr. Silva's class. If anyone has a question, just feel free to unmute.
Okay, we got a couple more questions here. I got Noah and Michael, if you got a chance.
A question. How many people were on the expedition?
So it was 100 people per rotation, and we had about 5 of them, but there were at least over 600 people that were actually on board the ship at one point. And there was, of course, hundreds of more people that were in their home countries that were actually helping assist with the expedition.
Cool.
Okay, I got actually a girl that Emily would like to go as well.
Awesome.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's Emily go first. Did you had to try already, Michael?
Do you still keep in touch with any of the people that you're on the expedition with?
Yes, of course. That's a great question, Emily. Yes, because we became such a wonderful community. We have a group chat, and I have friends that I'm very close with from this expedition that I still talk to all the time.
Amazing. Yeah, I bet you get super close to everyone when you're living just on the boat with them. So now, Miss S, do you have any more questions? Just your mics again.
You would think I've been doing this a year. I should know better. One was what kind of, regarding the ship itself, what kind of jobs are there to run a ship that big, and how does that work? And then the other question was, I guess, what kind of scientists were there?
She has to mute
The listing of them.
She unmutes it.
That's a great question. So to run a ship like this, you need at least 30 to 40 people for crew, that I'm estimating. You have, of course, your officers who are assessing, who are up on the bridge, so that's where they steered the actual ship. And we have crew members that are working in the engine room, making sure that the engine and all the mechanics that actually help keep the ship afloat and moving are running smoothly. And it's a really complex system, the engine room. I got to visit it twice. They don't really like people going in there for a lot of reasons. There were also other people like stewardesses. We had about 3 who were there that helped serve meals. We had chefs and a whole kitchen crew to actually cook meals for everyone. We had a doctor and nurse on board, which was very helpful in case of any emergencies. We also had people that were mechanics of all sorts for other different things, including helicopters. We had a helicopter team and mechanics out there as well.
Great. Another question that we got from YouTube was, while you were on the ship, what was your favorite thing to do for fun?
There were so many things. Photography is my life and my joy. So that's kind of first and foremost. I would go bother people to take photos of them because it was so exciting. But other things I did for fun, I love drawing. So I did a lot of sketching and just, really trying to take in what was kind of happening around me. We also had a swimming pool on board. It's very small, but we would play games on there like this water ball, which is water basketball, and a little bit of rugby involved too, which was quite fun. And we also had board games and people brought instruments and stuff like that. So just any activities where we could all work together and be together was joyful.
Yeah, sounds awesome. PAHS, I see you typed some questions in the chat. Did you guys want to ask them yourself, or I can also read them aloud if you want? It's up to you. I think you might be muted. I'm not sure if you're talking.
We were just more interested in if Canada had involvement and were there language barriers? Like there was 30 or 40 countries you said represented. Was there a working language, or was there all different languages on the boat?
Great question. So Canada was part of it. And I actually met quite a few scientists from Canada that were on board, which they're all great. There were no language barriers for the most part, at least with the scientists, just because it was an English-speaking vessel. A lot of science and higher academia in these fields are usually done in English, which was very surprising to me, and I didn't know. But the expedition was actually led by a German institute called the Alfred Wegener Institute, and the crew and the ship is German. So the crew, they had a spectrum of how well they knew English and would, mostly speak in German for when they were working in the engine room or doing those kinds of things.
Awesome. All right, Mr. Levogue, do you have some more questions for us?
Yes. Disha wants to know how many different animals did you photograph, and was it more or less than you thought you would photograph? And then I want to know what happens to all your photographs. These were amazing pictures, and it sounds like you took thousands. So how do we see them?
That's a great question. So to answer your question quickly, I took over 60,000 photos. It was a lot of photos, a lot of data. I also took film, which we have a planetarium production that's being produced in May. And I can send you all my email to kind of give you an idea of when that actually is happening for your local planetariums, or if you don't, it'll be on YouTube. And my photos I actually have on my website. I think we're also making a book of some sort. I think we're just trying to do what we can to share it. The MOSAiC Expedition has an Instagram account, which you can see a lot of really beautiful images, not just from me, but other very talented photographers and scientists with cameras as well. For animals, so I really take photos of megafauna, so those big animals. I was surprised by how many bears we actually saw. At some points, we couldn't even have a full day out on the ice because a polar bear would come every single day. And when a polar bear comes on the ice floe, everybody evacuates to the ship just for the safety of everyone, including the polar bears. I did photograph some seals. There were some whales, some birds, but really what was very interesting was all the tiny microorganisms. So those plankton that I was talking about, those little shrimp guys, while I didn't personally take photos of them, I did visit the ecosystems team a lot to actually go see the ones that they collected, and they were really cool.
So a few people on YouTube were wondering, was there anything that made you really nervous while you were on the expedition? Animals or the weather or just being far away from everyone?
Yeah, that was a good question. At first, when I was getting on my plane from Denver, I was questioning my life choices a little bit because it's always so nerve-wracking to sometimes to just be like, oh my gosh, I'm gone for 6 months, stopping everything in my life for this. What's going to happen when I come home? But in terms of being in the field, I felt pretty safe. We get training before we actually go out there, so polar expedition training. So in case you fall on the ice, in case you are dealing with really bad weather conditions, they make sure that you know what you're doing and have tools with you to know how to use. So I did fall through the ice twice, but only up to my waist, which was good as I was holding camera equipment. Wow. But you know, it happens, and just so long as you're safe and well trained and well versed in those things, which takes time, it's okay.
Totally, yeah. All right, Mr. Silva's grade 6 class. Do you have any more questions?
Hi there. I have one more question. I think you mentioned that the expedition was German-led by an institute. Was that a government agency sponsored, or is that a non-government agency?
I'm actually not entirely sure. So a lot of things which happen, there's institutes that solely focus on polar research, and I'm sure that they receive federal money from Germany. And actually we have those in all these different institutes. So like there's some here in the United States that focus solely on polar research, and they do get sometimes federal money or money from other different organizations. So I'm not entirely sure about Alfred Wegener's Institute and what kind of money they receive. I do know, however, that for myself, I was funded by the National Science Foundation, which has government money, as well as the Department of Energy, where they actually send out people to do atmospheric research as well.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. Miss S, if you have a question, feel free to ask. Okay. All right. Maybe Mr. Levoque has one.
We could keep Liliana for another hour. I'm looking at this. Is funny. I might have to just get your email and send you all these. These are
absolutely.
So was this the first? Charlotte wants to know: is this the first expedition you've been on? And does it? If so, or if not, can you describe others? Or where do you want to go next? If you can go anywhere for your next expedition.
Great question. So this is my first scientific research expedition. So this is when I've never been on a research expedition for scientists, but I've been on other expeditions, so photography and film specific ones. And so this has been me going on ships, whether it's in Alaska or Svalbard, which is a small island off of Norway that's located in the Arctic. And I would consider those to be expeditions as well. And we film and we produce content that hopefully helps educate the world about how incredible these places are. Where I would like to go to next is I'd like to return back to Alaska. I've been doing film work out there for about 7 years on the brown bears of Katmai, as well as the Bristol Bay area. And I would love to go back to Svalbard again too. That also is a place that really feels like the Arctic for me, where mountain meets sea, and it's such a special little place. And my email is in the chat if you want to ask more questions in the future too.
All right, so unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Lianna. That was really a lot of fun. I'm gonna put up the MOSAiC Expedition website if you guys want to learn more about anything. You should check it out over there. And what we like to do at the end of every presentation is just invite everyone back in to say a huge thank you for joining us. That was really amazing. So thank you. And I hope to see all of our classes again soon. Thanks everyone joining us on YouTube and everywhere. That was amazing. So thanks,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thank you.